which leads me to, obviously you're watching what's going on in the media with the cruise lines. And, do you want to comment on anything you're seeing out there with the ships and what's going on with the industry?
It's heartbreaking. Obviously you hear the stories about the customers that have been stuck on board, the passengers that have been stuck on board. But my mind just constantly goes to the crew. I think of those crew members that are out there and they can see land from where they are. And, many of them are probably way past their date that they were supposed to go home and see their family. Do they know if they have been exposed? Have one of their coworkers on board the ship become ill and they're having to deal with that. And I think about the job now of, the hotel manager, the captain, and the cruise director, whatever the position is being called now by that particular cruise line. The communication that they have to have with the guests that are still on board, with the crew, it's almost unimaginable. And I put myself, if I were, if this had happened 20 years ago, how would I have handled that if I were out there? And again, it's so different now because of social media and satellite telephones and cell phones. I mean, these passengers are having live interviews on the evening news that's being broadcast all over the world. That probably wouldn't have happened in our day just because the technology wasn't there. So it's heartbreaking to see. It's also it makes you wonder, what is the cruise industry going to look like when we come out on the other side of this?
Yeah.
We're going to get beyond this, obviously, and and I think it is going to change the way we do a lot of things in our lives going forward. And I hope we get back to the days when people will still want to go on great vacations, and cruise ships being included, but it's going to have to be different out there. And I just, I just think about it from your perspective as a hostess on board, or mine as a cruise director. When you're on the gangway and people are leaving for that last day, I just think of all the hugs and high fives and handshakes.
Yeah.
Those that probably won't happen anymore.
No.
I think of, the nights in the OB, where you were hugging, it was big group hugs and people singing along to ABBA Gold for 2 hours, linked arm in arm. Those things probably just don't happen anymore. And, I'm not an economist. I'm not a cruise line executive, but I'm thinking, do people want to go on ships now with 4,000 and 5,000 people? How long is it going to take until, people are comfortable doing that again? And so my heart breaks, but I think about, all of those thousands of crew members whose families, back in the Philippines or Indonesia, wherever they are, that depend on them financially for support.
Yep.
And that's gone away. And who knows when it's going to come back. And my heart just breaks for, the crew members, of course, the passengers that got sick on board. And that's just an awful experience there in itself. But I think you and I, and some of the people who watch this, those of us that have worked on board, it hits home in a way. I watch it on the news, and I just have it deep in my core. I just think about those crew members that are on there. What are they going through? We've got a couple, you might even be friends with them on social media, that are, they're making the best of it. They're exercising and they're running, and they're having, it looks like they're making the best of it, but that's what they're putting on social media. I would love to sit down and talk to some of these crew members afterwards and go, wow, what was it really like? And you thought that you and I and all the people that we worked with had a bond. I cannot imagine the bond, the connection that the crews on that ship right now will never forget each other for the rest of their lives. They're going through something that none of us in our craziest imaginations would have ever thought something like,
Mhm.
okay, a pandemic could happen, that, but you don't think that people are going to be stuck on a cruise ship for weeks and months with
No.
no idea when they're going to get off.
Well, that's the hard thing because they don't know when they're going to get off. I was reading a couple of things this morning. One was some cruise ships are trying to go to home ports where the majority of the crew can actually get off. So let's say, Holland America, for example, they'll sail to Indonesia so that they can get 300 Indonesian crew members off because the charter flight that they had organized from, let's say, the U.S. was canceled and they had to, do something different. So we just had the Rotterdam and the Rotterdam
And the Zaandam.
They were on that holding pattern with the Panama Canal, even with that, being stressful. But to be turned away from all these countries because the countries are worried that they'll bring infected people in, when the airlines are still flying, with people coming in and out of the country. It's almost like an oxymoron, so to speak. But to be held hostage would be really tough.
I think the stories that we're going to hear down the road are going to be inspiring and they're going to be eye-opening. I wish everyone that's on those ships safety and good mental health, and it's just an awful situation.
It is, and one of the proudest moments I ever had as cruise director was representing the crew. I was really very honored to be able to, speak on their behalf, to all the guests and really represent them and who they are, to give a face to them, because there's so many who work behind the scenes that people just never see because they're not in front of the house positions, right? And I remember with Holland America at the time, we had 70% return passenger ratio, which was the biggest in the industry, which meant that people kept coming back time and time and time again. And they came back. I mean, the food was good, don't get me wrong. The itineraries were great. We had great shore excursions, but they came back for the crew. And they loved the cruise show, the Indonesian cruise show, the Filipino cruise show. They loved getting to know the entertainment staff. I mean, the officers who would come down and socialize, they really were very, very engaging. They didn't just sit in their ivory towers and, wait for a complaint to come through. They really came out, to interact with guests every single day to maintain good ratings. And when I was doing my debark talk, this was actually a longer cruise, and the couple I'm going to talk about are actually people I'm still friends with today. And they're from Canada, and they were telling me this story about how they had been on vacation in Indonesia. They had gone to Bali, and they were on their own. They weren't on a cruise ship, and they were walking down the streets of this small village, and they heard someone call their names, and they stopped and they turned around, and there was one of their stewards from 2 years before. 2 years, not 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 years before. He remembered them.
Amazing.
It was just, it still to this day gives me goosebumps when I talk about that story, because number one, I still know those people. And, I took very much a tremendous amount of pride for the company I worked for. And I integrated that example into my debark talk to say, you came on board as strangers, you leave as friends, and we're in this together. We are now have become a family. And I use that story to show the example of the crew just didn't put on a face, or while you're on board the ship, yeah, they put on a happy face, but they really do care. These are real human beings who could be doctors, psychiatrists, lawyers back in their home countries, but they could never make that kind of living back home of what they can make here, because they have, 11 siblings to make, to help put through school. They're here to make a difference for their children, so their children can go to school or go to college and not have the life they have. They sacrifice so much for their families back home, and to see them in a position like that is, like you said, it's heartbreaking. My heart goes out to them because of that. They're people.
And I think it takes a unique type of person to work on a cruise ship. And the ones who aren't cut out for it, they kind of self-eject after like 1 or 2 contracts. And I think, the people, those cabin stewards and the dining room stewards are some of the most sincere, genuine people in the world. And hearts of gold. But working on a cruise ship is, I've always said, it's a career. You can't fake it. If you're having a bad day, or let's say a bad cruise, just everything goes wrong, you can fake it for a day. You might be able to fake it for a cruise. If you're not feeling it, if you're not hitting your stride, you can probably pull off that. If you weren't at your best, you can probably fake it for 1 cruise and the customers would never know. But if you were genuinely unhappy out there and were not a people person and a people pleaser, I say it's a type of career you can't fake it long term. You couldn't even fake it for a full contract, because if you weren't feeling it, it would show after a couple of cruises. So my hat's off to everyone that have ever worked on a cruise ship and made it work, and those that are still out there fighting the good fight. Go for it. Thanks for carrying the banner into the new world, the new reality that we live in. And I just, if anybody that's still working on ships is seeing this, we all wish you all the best, and we hope that we are seeing customers coming back on board again soon, so that you can share your talents with the rest of the world like you need to be doing, instead of floating a few miles offshore in quarantine.
Thank you for joining me for today's Captain's Table Conversations with Yvette. Stay tuned for more, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe.